Welcome, everybody. We'll just wait for everybody to join us. It is my pleasure today to introduce our project director, Paul Yaknin, who is going to introduce you to our lovely host and our lovely panelists.
Thank you, Chantal. Hi, it's really great to be here with you. I just want to welcome you to this first of the TRaCE online events. And I want to publicly acknowledge my unending gratitude to Chantal, who has done so much work for the project and made so much of it work. Let me introduce you to the host of this event. Hannah Carell is a PhD candidate in the Department of English, doing what I might say is a brilliant PhD on women and conversion and theater in the age of Shakespeare. I'm going to hand it over to Hannah now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Paul and Chantal, for organizing, and Danielle and Matthew for being here with us. It's lovely to see some familiar faces and names and some new people as well. So to start off, I'm going to talk to our panelists for about 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll open things up for questions. We really hope that you'll come with your most burning existential questions about the PhD and alternate career paths. But first, I'd just like to invite Matthew and Danielle, if you guys could introduce yourselves and maybe tell us about what your PhD dissertation was on and the job that you're currently in.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from the West Coast today, so I'm over in Vancouver. My name is Danielle. I finished my PhD. I defended in 2014. Technically, convocation was 2015. So in the Department of English, I was a 19th century novels person, kind of hovering between Romantic and Victorian. And my dissertation focused on a little known subgenre called silver fork novels, which are great. I highly recommend you check them out. They're very fun, full of like fancy clothes and good food. And I was looking at the use of the detail and highly detailed descriptions in this subgenre. And I am currently working at the University of British Columbia in a staff role there, a student advising role. So my job title is career educator, which is kind of a variation of career advising. And I have the great privilege of having my portfolio focus on supporting master's and PhD students. So while I'll be speaking a lot today from kind of my experience, this is also kind of tied up with what I get to do as my day job now.
Wonderful, thank you so much.
And I'm Matt Wyman McCarthy. Hi, everyone. I got my PhD in history in 2015, supervised by Elizabeth Elborn, Brian Cowan, and my research was on slavery and anti-slavery in the British Empire. So late 18th, early 19th century. I probably still remember my academic interview answer on the 3-minute summary of it, but I won't go down that route. And my current job is I'm a research facilitator at Wilfrid Laurier University, which involves kind of a number of different things, but the main one is doing grant development, grant writing, grant editing, helping faculty get external funding for their research projects.
Thank you both. Could you each briefly narrate, whichever one of you wants to start is fine, for us how you got from point A, deciding to do a PhD in the first place, to point B, which is your current position that you have?
I guess I'll go first since I haven't muted the mic. So when I finished my PhD, I guess the final few, my PhD path was, I think, fairly conventional, with the exception that in the final few years, I was also managing editor of the Journal of British Studies, so an academic journal that my supervisors were editing at the time. And so that got me on the route of editing. I facilitated a writing workshop for early career PhDs during my final years of McGill. After that, I did a 2-year postdoc at Columbia University in New York, and then a 2-year postdoc at the University of New Hampshire, where I was also managing editor of the journal 18th Century Studies. And I got that position because of what I had done during my PhD work. And then throughout those postdoc stops, I've also done a fair bit of freelance editing. So working with faculty on academic articles, books, working with grad students on dissertations, cover letters, things like that. And so that, that combination of academic work and then kind of strategic writing support for authors made me a good fit for my current role, which is, you know, working with people one-on-one, helping them translate their academic ideas, their ambitions, how to translate that for a funding body. So kind of the through line throughout my post-PhD career has been editing.
Thank you.
That was so concise, Matthew. I don't know that I'm going to be able to mirror that. I feel like my journey was a little more Dickensian, if you will. But I started the PhD with the aspiration to become a faculty member. That stayed pretty consistent for me. I will say, as I moved through the PhD, I started to understand some things about what that trajectory was actually like that I did not know coming in. And I'm happy to kind of speak to how that understanding evolved. But sort of later in my PhD, I was starting to kind of question and wonder about what other options were out there. So I actually booked an appointment with the career services at McGill, not really knowing anything about them or what they did, but it seemed like a useful action to take. And they very cunningly I ended up walking out of the appointment with a volunteer role. They actually offered kind of a peer student support basis where they were looking for someone to do some editing of resumes and cover letters, and thought, you know, you're coming in with an English background, that might be a skill set you had. For me, it was an interesting way to kind of do something different, be around people. I was in the writing intensive stage, which can feel a little bit lonely. So I liked the structure and the chance to be around people. So as a result of that, as a result of being in the office a couple hours a week, I started to get to know the team there. I started to actually see what they did, what a role in student services might look like. And sort of through some circumstances that were bad luck for some of my colleagues, but good luck for me, someone I think literally broke their leg and they were like, we need someone to fill in a few days. I was there, I had some familiarity. They were like, you can probably figure this out. So I sort of started part-time, and then another part-time opportunity came up. And over the course of a few years, during which I was also doing other things, which I'm happy to talk about, that kind of gradually grew from part-time contract to longer-term contract to full-time contract to me realizing I might want to actually make a career in student services, and then starting to apply for full-time positions. So I applied for my current position at UBC in 2017, went through kind of that application and interview process, and moved out west in the fall of 2017 to start this role just over 3 years ago.
Thank you both so much. Those are incredible stories and so interesting. Do you each feel then like having the PhD degree in particular was viewed as an asset when you were applying for these jobs?
I mean, for me, it was a requisite, not an asset, right? It was, I was applying for jobs where you had to have a PhD. And what got me different positions along the way was, okay, you had your PhD and what else, right? So it's kind of that and what, you know, you're a brilliant scholar. Obviously we all are. You're this innovative teacher, you've TA'd and even taught your own classes, and great. What's the other thing? And it was kind of that tertiary interest for me, which was the key to kind of full-time permanent employment.
Yeah, for me, it wasn't a requisite. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about the work that I do, my boss sometimes says that the best way to train someone to be a career advisor is for them to have an interesting and in some ways messy career experience themselves. So I don't think it was so much the fact that it had been specifically a PhD, but the fact that I had done different things and kind of wrestled with some of these questions myself. And then what I did find in my current role and various roles, what it offered was different opportunities. So I think my job would look different if I did not have a PhD. I definitely have the opportunity to do more work, say around the academic job market, or, you know, working sometimes with faculty, or having the opportunity to be in classroom spaces that might not have been as available to me, or might not have been as available to me as quickly had I not come in with that training.
Thank you. So something that really struck me when you were both kind of narrativizing your experience is that you both seem to have, during your PhDs, kind of worked to diversify yourselves, volunteering or taking on different roles outside of just teaching and writing. And so I think my question here is, how should we as current PhD students, and I think even I saw a couple of master's students on the list here, how should we be preparing during our graduate programs for the non-academic job market? And
I guess I'll jump in. I think you hit the nail on the head. It's Friday afternoon when you said it's diversifying or it's doing something else. Like if I can like sit back and be the old man for a second, like if there's one piece of advice I would give to you, it would be to do that other thing, whatever it is, right? So for Danielle, it was career services. For me, it was editing. I have friends who have volunteered with teaching and learning, and then post-PhD got work in teaching and learning. One friend of mine, it was volunteering at a museum, turned into like short-term paid gig as a museum, now works in public history. And so I don't really think it matters, what academic unit you start volunteering with or what nonprofit you volunteer with outside of the university or what it is. But I think you need that kind of that other skill set. And I don't just think it's for alt-ac employment. Like every academic job that I interviewed for, I was asked, tell us of a time you helped a colleague, or tell us of a time you took an initiative outside your field. I mean, it was some variation of the question trying to get at like, okay, what else do you do that kind of makes you interesting and would make you a colleague who would kind of contribute? And so I don't think it's an either or. I think by kind of doing something else, creating a new network, cultivating a new interest, you're setting yourself up for success, or in the academic case, at least to be competitive on that stream as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think my kind of one potential take-home message was also look for something or multiple other things. And I also agree that I think I would go with what you genuinely like and are curious about. I know sometimes it can turn into like, how do I game the system and be hyper strategic about it? And like, there might be some value to considering some of those pieces, but I think if you're doing something out of genuine curiosity, you will be more motivated, you'll be more sustained in that, you will build those relationships more easily because you will genuinely be curious to talk to people about their work and they'll see that in you. I mean, I will acknowledge that the time piece is real. We can talk a little bit more about that. And I know I don't want this to turn into like, do all the things and then more things, because that can be challenging advice. But I did also, want to pick up on that idea that, it can help if you do decide to go the academic route as well. I think that these are becoming increasingly important. And I think it's sometimes not helpful to try to subdivide as like, do these things for this outcome and do these other things for this other outcome, because I don't think it happens in that siloed or that structured of a way. I think if you're doing things you are interested in, if you're doing things that you'd be excited to talk to other people about, and also the other thing I would say is reflecting on the skills you are gaining. I think sometimes we do things and we don't necessarily assign value to them, or we don't see value assigned to them through systems and through other people. So the second step I would say after doing the things is taking some time to reflect on what would I say to someone about why this thing was important and how it might prepare me to contribute.
Thank you so much. And I was just wondering then, just going off what you said at the end there, Danielle, about the sort of thinking through the value that is assigned to certain skills. I'm wondering, I think this is a big question for some of us, like what value do you assign to the PhD as a degree? What skills do you think that it gives us that make us like beneficial to any company, right? That, what do we bring that makes us unique as candidates?
So I'm going to skirt a bit of a fine line here, and that I do think another message sometimes, and this was kind of important for me, is also being able to separate an identity and a professional identity beyond having a PhD, or I think, it's interesting when we think about the language, it's often even like being a PhD, right? It really becomes this sort of strong identification. And I think sometimes that can be a little bit limiting. Like if we think about job postings, when you were asking about like the requisite, there are some jobs where a PhD will be required. There will be some jobs where it will be kind of an asset or an advantage. And there will be some jobs where they had no notion that they were ever planning to hire someone with a PhD. And the conversation may not be hire me because I hold this credential so much as hire me because I can do these things and maybe you connect those to where they came from. And maybe that's never made explicit, right? Like often people are like, you actually read all your emails and bring these things up. And I don't necessarily always say yes, because I spent years reading very long Victorian novels and therefore I can kind of, or like cramming papers in before the seminar to make it seem like I had read them. And I don't always feel it necessary to connect those two skills, but I sort of know where they come from and I do see them showing up. So that maybe would be where I would start.
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, if I had to give kind of one answer, I'd say it's project management, right? And that involves managing a budget. It involves taking a big task and dividing it into chunks. It involves producing kind of regular deliverables. You know, maybe talking about your advisor as a stakeholder is kind of pushing it a bit, but it's, I would think in terms of project management and the things, you know, it's a 4-year, 5-year, 6-year project. What are the types of things that go into that?
Makes a lot of sense. I do want to pick up again on just this idea. I think it's so interesting between like your professional identity and your personal identity and the way that those things can get collapsed in graduate school. I don't think it would be too much of a surprise to say that when we're really deeply entrenched in academia, it sort of feels like the world begins and ends with it. And it can be difficult for people to see themselves having an identity outside of, I am a PhD, I'm a graduate student, I'm a scholar. So I'm wondering, I guess, if you have any advice or any sort of comment to students who I've heard from who might be feeling guilty or disappointed or sad about like wanting to explore non-academic routes for their careers.
Well, maybe so I'll just kind of relate one of my experiences and maybe there'll be a piece of advice in there. But, you know, I applied on the job market, you know, and was longlisted on some and shortlisted for others and campus visits and that. And so I was pretty kind of set on that track. The first kind of tenure track job I was offered was in 2017, I guess. So I'd been a postdoc for a few years. A college, you know, primarily teaching. I think I would have loved it in that. Was in a very Trumpy part of the US, to choose the appropriate word. It would have meant longer term or underemployment for my partner because of a PhD. My partner, who's a visible minority and not very diverse area. And that was really the occasion of a lot of you know, asking a lot of questions. I spoke to a couple of my academic mentors outside of McGill. One of them, you know, full professor at Columbia, really kind of like, you know, the peak of the academic food chain. And he said, look, when I started my PhD and even when I finished my PhD, I was all about, you know, go to where the job is, make a name for yourself. You know, my identity is wrapped up in my scholarship. But now that as I get a bit older and I have kids and all that, you know, I realize it's not just what you do that's important. It's actually, you know, where you live and who you do it with and who you see and all those things. You know, and he said that's something I realized kind of later on in the game. But as he was kind of giving that advice, I realized, you know, he was kind of putting into words what I was feeling. You know, it's not just, you know, it's not just what you do, your identity basically. And, you know, for me, I guess the disappointment in that was going to be saying no to something where I could have said, look, I made it. You know, I spent 10 years doing this and many of my cohort haven't made it, but I've made it. Look, kind of that, you know, a bit of an egotistical thing. But when I was open to the possibility of not doing it, then I realized, no, that's not what I want to do. And I mean, I think it was absolutely the right decision. So I guess it's just, in my case, it was being open to that possibility.
Yeah, I think those points about, you know, the people in our lives, the desire to be in specific locations are really important. The other thing I'll pick up on, and I mean, this is going to sound basic, but there are smart, interesting people in all different places in the world, and you can work. I mean, I know that I'm still in a university system, but I believe even if I had gone entirely outside of higher education, you can be surrounded by smart, interesting people, and sometimes, you know, in ways that open doors, perhaps if you've been in a very specific type of academic environment leading up until that point. And then, you know, to take that even a step further, there are lots of ways to have intellectual fulfillment in your life. If that's something you crave and something you are drawn to, I do think that there are ways to create that. I mean, hopefully your job is also interesting in and of itself, but if your job doesn't necessarily require you to think about 19th century art, there are other places and spaces, I think, in which to do that, and you have the agency to create that. And I think actually in some ways, sometimes the stability that might come with different types of employment, either around income or time or just like emotional bandwidth, frees you up to do some of those things. And I think actually for a lot of people, myself included, and some other folks I've talked to, that move to different type of work has actually allowed us to anchor into intellectual curiosity in a way that when I had more things on my plate, I was too burnt out often to be curious.
Danielle, are you saying you read for pleasure again?
You know, I was actually going to share, it was the most interesting thing on Twitter. This is poor citation on my part, but all I remember was it sort of saying, of folks who have moved into alt academic roles, what's the number one thing you're happy to have time for? And the responses all the way down were reading, which, you know, is an interesting sort of systemic conversation and structural conversation. But yeah, there's lots of things you can choose to do with your time and the shape of your life. And sorry, one other piece I'll throw out there. I think increasingly it's also possible to have a professional life that's complex and includes multiple things. So I do some freelance work around writing and editing in addition to my full-time job. That sort of feeds a different part of my brain and a different part of my skill set. And that's, you know, a choice. Not everyone wants to do that, but I think increasingly professional lives are also complex and multifaceted, and it may not be that it's one job giving you everything.
Yeah, that really resonates what both of you have said. So let's say then that people are on board for going out and trying out an alternate career path outside of just being a tenure track professor. How does one go about finding alt-ec career options that are even maybe necessarily like relevant or interesting to them in their specific discipline? How do we find career options that we might be well suited for?
Danielle, as the grad, do you want to give a professional view there as I mull an answer?
Sure. I mean, so I guess I would say I would start with what are you interested in doing? And I think the most common, I don't want to say mistake because it's totally logical where it would come from, but like, what can I do? And I would at least hold some space for yourself to think about what do I want to do? And for a second, put a pause on the voice that will say, you're not qualified and no one will ever, like, what would you want to do? And maybe that's not even job titles, because fair enough, many of us don't have a ton of literacy around what our job's called, but like, what would you spend a day doing? Who would you be working with? Do you have a sense? Do you want to be in government, private sector, higher education? What kind of things would you be doing? If that still doesn't feel like it's yielding anything, like, who are the people in your life who seem like they might have vaguely interesting jobs or where you just don't know what they do all day? And would they be willing to talk to you about it? Often people would be, and that might start to shed some light on like, oh, that's what a project manager does, or that's what a policy analyst does. So I think I would start like really simple. What interests you? Who do you know who does something that might be vaguely interesting? There are lots of great resources. I can also, you know, I'm going to plug the McGill Career Center here. They really are great and have lots of good resources available. So you can do a deeper dive into those pathways. But I think I would start from that place of like, what am I curious about? What am I interested in? And don't necessarily assume that there's always credentials attached to that. There might be, or there might be some retraining or some upskilling, but start from, you know, what are the problems I would like to be solving? Who are the people I'd like to be interacting with? And then you can kind of at least build from there. Also know that these are not standardized. The similar jobs might be called totally different things, or they might be called the same thing and actually have very different functionalities. So job searching in some ways, while the academic market is really challenging, it's at least kind of clear. you know what the job titles mean. There's a season, they kind of all get posted. Searching for other types of jobs is a lot messier. It's a lot more ad hoc. It's often a lot more driven by right place, right time, or someone knows you. And I can speak to more of all those pieces. But I would say, start with where you are, start with your interests, and know that it's not sort of some secretly scripted process that everyone knows about. It's a lot of kind of figuring it out and feeling it through.
Yeah, I'll agree with Danielle completely that it's a lot more scattershot. For me, it was, I kind of thought, well, what am I qualified and like? And I think maybe I was a little more desperate for a job, that I said, okay, I'm just going to look at the websites, the job websites of every university in Ontario. And in doing that, first of all, you read job descriptions. It's like, oh yeah, maybe I am qualified. Oh yeah, that's a good term to describe what I did, or oh, maybe I do have that skill set. So, you're doing research in the course of applying for this, when you write a cover letter and maybe, one of them gets an interview and you say, okay, well, that cover letter kind of worked. Okay, that gives you something to refine for the next one. In my case, I applied for jobs outside of Ontario, which I wasn't thrilled about that idea, though I probably would have taken one, but the interviews are practice. You can take an interview with someone and you don't really owe them anything. And so the job I got now, I had interviewed for a very similar job in Alberta a few months prior. And I just knew after the interview for the job I got, I just said, yeah, I got it, because I had been through that process before. So yes, like University Affairs and LinkedIn and all those places, but I found going to individual universities or museums or city governments or what have you, but it's the website of the individual organizations.
And I think that's really interesting too, even the idea of like, I would like to live in this place. What jobs and organizations are in this place, right? I think that will probably resonate with a lot of people who I know don't want to leave Montreal or don't want to leave Canada, right? Which is a real concern, especially with COVID and things like that can get in the way of planning to move internationally. I just have one or two more questions for you before we open things up. So there are lots of students here who are in different graduate organizations. I'm a part of EGSA. We have a professional development chair who thinks about workshops and stuff that we should put on to help prepare graduate students. So I'm wondering, is there any sort of recommendation either of you might make for things that would be particularly helpful for graduate students to hear or know about or work on right now? That are kind of easy to put together, things like that? Or looking back, are there things that you wish your programs had done to help prepare you for alternate avenues?
So my grad program, the year that kind of people first went on the job market, there was a 6-7 week, here's how to read job ads, here's how to write a letter if you get an interview on campus, here's how to do it, all that. Offering something similar for alt-ac. Offering that is almost more important than what would be offered during it. In a way, it's kind of validation and recognition that this is a path that maybe most humanities grads in Canada are going to go on. So just kind of, validating that as an option. In terms of specific skills, as Danielle said, how to find a job, right? How to, every question you ask, I think, today could almost be the subject of a week, right? How do you craft your dissertation and frame it to speak to, a non-academic position? So I'd say almost just offering kind of a regular, every fall, we're offering this, and to make it for the humanities, because there are differences with the social sciences, there are differences with the natural sciences. So specifically for kind of arts and humanities, a workshop over the course of 6 weeks or something, I think would be extremely valuable.
I agree with the workshop. I'm also trying to mull over. I'm not sure exactly what this would look like, but I guess the one thing I would say is, for many types, including myself, who are sort of drawn to academia, there's often this idea that, like, if I learn more, or if I keep gathering information, that will ease the process. And the information is helpful up until a point, like all these things about, reading a job ad or writing a cover letter. It can include bullet points, those kind of little details can be interesting. At some point, it's also the doing. And I guess the one caveat I would offer is, as we think about the professional development and as students think about participating in professional development, is getting that information, but also knowing when you will get more, as I think Matthew was indicating, by throwing your hat in the ring and applying for that job or seeing if you get that interview, and also the importance of talking to people. I know that can feel sort of like unstructured and not always clear what it's leading to, but I would say all of those professional development pieces really need to be balanced by like trying stuff out and talking to people, and that those are also going to be where that growth and also where that confidence comes from.
Well, and it sounds like talking to people and trying out new things is maybe the kind of subheading of both of your journeys, right? Of trying out things that you liked and networking within those systems and getting to know other people kind of outside of just this one very tight kind of track. So I think my last question before I turn things open is just, are you happy that you got a PhD and spent the time? I'm sure that's the most obvious question, but I know as a person who's deep in the trenches of writing a dissertation right now, some days I'm wondering, why, what, why am I here? So I just wondered, like, looking back on it, are you happy that you got a PhD?
Well, we're really going existentialist here, right?
Yeah.
Yes, I think yes, because at the time when I started it, I'd always have this nagging what if, like I thought, professor, what a great job. I want to do it and want to do it. And in a way, having gone through the process and now seeing and saying, no, that's not what I want to do. I needed to go through the process to kind of come to that realization. Like Danielle said, work-life balance is much better post-PhD. In my all-tac job now, it's a lot less pressure. You work to a deadline and then I help someone submit an application, it's done. You wake up Saturday morning and there's not that guilt. What else could I be learning and doing? I would say working in a university system, there is, and I don't feel this often, but on occasion, there is this idea, okay, I'm in the support role and I'm working with people who are in a faculty role. And universities don't often talk about employees, they talk about staff and faculty. And they're very different pay grades. And there's very different clout. If you want to get something done and you have a faculty member behind it, that's going to go a lot further than I'm able to do. And so every once in a while, there is one of those like, that could have been me. But the advantages of kind of having done the PhD, I'm always a doctor. I make my brothers call me doctor. That's always with me. And now choosing to do something different. It was the right path for me, and I'm glad I did it.
Yeah, I'm absolutely happy I did it. And I think part of what makes me happy I did it, and I think this was probably true at the time, but certainly has become more and more true as I moved away from it, is now I kind of just think of it as an experience rather than a credential. And that might also be a piece of advice. I think some of the PhD candidates I know who have been the happiest and the sanest are the people who more or less treated it as a job, as something that they were responsible for, as this experience that they were having, but that also did not have to necessarily determine. If we think about the wider world of work, it's actually incredibly common for people to work in a certain field for a certain number of years and then go do something else or something adjacent to it. And maybe speaking to some of these feelings, it actually it surprised me, and I found it incredibly comforting. Most people are not actually that interested or surprised by, oh, you have a PhD and now you do this thing. Maybe slightly within the academic system where there is a bit more understanding, but certainly in the wider world, people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense. You do something at a university now. So yeah, just all that to say, I'm absolutely happy I did it. I really see that as just kind of a life stage where I got to do some incredibly interesting things, where I got to have a really good time. I know those moments can kind of fall away when you're into the midst of it, but I think as you look back, you really kind of see them in retrospect, where I met some incredible people and some friendships that still really sort of sustain me, and that formed a lot of pieces of who I am. And I think if we go back to, the notion of education, I think the PhD was an incredible education, and then other things happened in my professional life. So yeah, I don't feel any sort of sense that like, oh, that set me up for something that didn't come to fruition.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much for talking with me and answering all of my questions, both existential and perhaps more practical. You've given me a lot to think about. I want to open it up now to our participants. You can just feel free to unmute and ask your question if you're feeling bold. If you're feeling a little bit more shy, I do have the chat open. So you can also throw a question into the chat. You can raise your little Zoom hand if that makes you feel more polite or whatever, but it's completely up to you. Oh, here, I see one in the chat from Jana, but Tina, go ahead first.
Thank you so much. I want to talk about my case, and I want to put the discussion very, very practical. I'm a PhD student in religious studies, and my field is a kind of comparative studies between Buddhism, Islam, and a kind of sociology of religion. And on the other hand, English is not my first language. So as I'm looking through the jobs, as much as I have found, I think that if I cannot find any job in the academic field, so I really don't know what should I do after this kind of materials that I'm working on and I'm doing research. Unfortunately, I have not found any, for example, institute which is focusing on doing research in these issues or something like that. So I don't know if you really have any kind of suggestion to a person who is working in this kind of fields like me. Thank you.
Yeah, I can offer an initial suggestion. And, you know, I'm meeting you for the first time. I don't have context, but I think sometimes the research topic is not going to be the way into the job search. So I would take it back to, again, these questions of like, what are you interested in? If it is around research, could you be supporting other people's research based on maybe some of the regions that have come up in your dissertation? Do you have an interest in like policy in those areas or working with people from those regions? Do you have languages as something that's emerged from your dissertation? Are you interested in working with students and you maybe have a context on, you know, international students? Those are just, you know, some of the things I might think about. And you know, only you can really answer that question of how important is it that those research themes or those research questions are what continue to drive your career. But where I would offer is that doesn't have to be the whole scope, because yeah, I think that's completely right. It might be quite challenging to find opportunities if they're being driven by research topic. And I might try to think about, is there anything adjacent to or intersecting with that research topic that could also be of interest to you?
Yeah, I just echo Danielle that like, you know, exactly what you said. I feel I could almost say the same thing about my dissertation. You know, here's my thing that I'm doing. How am I going to find a job related to slavery and the slave trade? That's probably not the way in. But at the same time, because you've studied that topic, you know, for like 5 years or whatever it is, you can say you're an expert in cross-cultural communication, in integration and multiculturalism, or things like that. So I think it would pay off to, you know, to look at your dissertation and say, okay, what are kind of 5 or 6 buzzwords here, which will make sense to people who don't know anything about the sociology of religion, but they know like, you know, ethnicity. That's kind of a very general topic that people can see and say, okay, this person is an expert in this subject. But like Danielle said, I think it's more important to think of the project management. You're an independent learner. You've managed this giant project and broke it down into chunks and things like that. It's the skill set more than the content.
Yeah, and I might also just chime in methods. I don't know anything about your research project, but are you doing surveys? Are you analyzing data using particular tools? It might be a very different type of data that you go on to analyze in other roles, but those skill sets that you might be developing if your project had some of those qualitative or quantitative aspects. Teaching, like, you know, do you love teaching? Maybe there's something in the teaching and learning field or educational development. And in those cases, it might not matter so much what you taught, but that you developed a lot of proficiency around teaching and maybe an interest in pedagogy.
And if I can just jump in again, you began by saying English isn't your first language. Well, in a job letter, that is, in addition to being fluent in English, you are also, bilingualism is a strength. So yeah, so that's, it's kind of the spin you put on it.
Thank you so much.
We have one question in the chat that I'll just read out from Jana, who's wondering if either of you can speak to additional accreditations in the way of like online courses or certificate programs that you might recommend is useful for MA or PhD. She says in English, but we can open that up to humanities grads. I think she says it's common to hear of students in STEM fields taking these types of courses as a way to strengthen their resumes and skill sets. Is there anything similar that us humanities grads should be doing?
I don't have a direct answer to that. Although I appreciate the challenge in that when you don't know what your field is going to be, you don't necessarily know, or you're not sure if I do this, there will be a job for it. My partner graduated PhD in history a few years ago and was kind of still looking for that full-time work. And she says to me frequently, oh, if I just, if I could take this certificate and know that it would lead to a job, or if I got in an entry position in this stream, then I'd gladly do more accreditation. But it's hard to invest the time and money when you don't know what it will yield. And so that's not an answer for you at all, Jana, but it is to kind of sympathize with that question and that challenge.
Yeah, I would pick that up to echo and say, like, I think you want to have a reason and an intention for the skill you're pursuing. So, I mean, I know a few folks who have come from humanities degrees and then, are like, I really want to break into the tech world, doing a 6-week coding boot camp to kind of get a fundamental skill level. And like that propelled them forward. But I think you would want to know, I know something about that world of work. I would be excited to be in that world of work. So sort of leading from where you want to be and then the accreditation or the training that will help you get there, not the accreditation. I mean, I suppose you could do, especially if it was a lower stakes and lower commitment, you could use a course as a way to try something. We were thinking about like curriculum design and development. Is there a way you can use a course or a bit of training as a way to test out that field? The other thing I would say around anything around accreditation and credentials is talk to people working in that field, or better yet, hiring in that field, about their perception of that accreditation before you spend money on doing it. There can definitely be a belief that like, oh, inherently this will make me more hireable. And that is not always the case. There are some excellent trainings that can really move you forward, but you definitely want to fact check that with people to get a sense of like, is this something I need in order to become more hireable? Or is this something that they'd be willing to train me to do once I'm in the job?
Mm.
There's also, I'm going to take my partner's example as well. So she's a member of the, I guess, Learning Specialists Association of Canada and the Ontario Museum Association or something like that. But it's, it's probably maybe $100 per year membership. But it allows you to put in that cover letter, I'm a member of this, I have an interest in it, you're on the listserv. There's some webinars and opportunities for professional development there. So it's kind of it's a less expensive way of like signaling your interest in a field.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just jumping off that, first of all, I just wanted to thank both of you for being here today and giving us a lot of this really helpful information. Thank you so much. And actually, Matt, I'm in history as well, and I have the same supervisor that you used to, Elizabeth Elborn. We've corresponded in email, and I'm really happy that you're in your current role because you've helped me get SSHRC grants. So thank you. I just wanted to say that.
Well, congratulations.
No, thank you. You're very helpful. But my question has to do with what you guys were talking about when you were saying what we should be doing during our PhD to make us more competitive and to, have that other factor. So you have your PhD and then what? So I've been trying to do those things throughout my PhD. So I've been very conscious of that, but I've noticed that a lot of the things you both mentioned, Danielle, you spoke about volunteering at career services. Matt, you spoke about your work at journals, which is often unpaid, and also spoke about people you both knew who volunteered in teaching and learning services, things like that. The thing is, for instance, for me, I'm a first generation student and I come from a working class background. So it's harder for me to take on volunteering opportunities, I would rather take a paid role because I need that, it's harder for me to take on more volunteer roles. It's not feasible. So what would you both say then to students like me who are first generation, working class background, who can't take on such a volume of unpaid roles, but we still want to be doing all that we can to give us that so what factor, if you can speak to that.
My answer would be, maybe it's overly simplistic, but it would be find paid work. None of the roles I had were volunteer. I think I was on the PGSS for a few years and, probably a committee or two as like a student rep in the history department. But my editing, working with the writing center and facilitating a peer support group, those were paid roles. And I think they count for, I don't think an employer's, a potential employer in academia or outside of academia is going to say, was that paid or not? Or I don't think you're going to get more points for it being a volunteer role. That's just my thought.
Yeah, I would even pick that up to say the reverse, right? Like paid work is probably actually going to be better, is going to be often perceived more positively. So yeah, a couple points. Thank you very much for raising this, because I think it's incredibly important. The work at the career services was volunteer for me, but it became paid work fairly quickly. And that would be something I would kind of, keep in mind. Some other work I did through like the writing center and being quite broad-minded in terms of some of the sessional courses that I took on, which ended up allowing me to say I've worked with, engineers and students from all different disciplines. Those were all paid teaching opportunities. So yeah, I would definitely think about what are paid opportunities, whether or not you sort of think that you could volunteer. Paid is always preferable. I offer the volunteer story only because I think sometimes it is an easier way to get a foot in the door for certain types of opportunities. The bar might be a little bit lower. Or I would also say sometimes even things like, is it a one day, right? So I know an ongoing commitment can be a lot, especially if you do have other things on your plate, but could you sit at the registration desk for a conference for like one morning? I did that many years back and met someone who actually edits the Montreal Review of Books. And I still do the occasional freelance work of paid reviews for coming out of that. So it doesn't have to be volunteer. I think in fact, paid work is better. If you know that paid work is part of what you're looking for, I guess the one thing I would be a little bit cautious of is sometimes the teaching assistant and the research assistant roles will be kind of the most visible types of paid work. And I might want to get a little bit creative about what other types of work might be available to you, or being really intentional about those RA and TA roles. Can you co-construct them, right? If you want to be able to say, I've built a website, can I build a website for the course that I'm TAing for? Like, I think you can actually do a lot within those buckets. And yes, paid work is usually better for you and better for the resume. And it's not to say you shouldn't pursue that. Just sometimes in a few cases, there may be a lower bar of entry for other types of work, and that's not a reality that's ideal for anybody.
Yeah, no, thank you. Can I just follow up really quickly? You both mentioned the writing center, and I've been on the website before. I've seen that they don't really advertise a ton of positions, and I feel like you would have to kind of enter into a volunteer role. Could you guys just briefly talk about how you got your paid roles in the writing center or places like that?
Mine was it was through the writing center at the library, and they were running, I don't know if they run it anymore. It was kind of a dissertation writing workshop for early stage PhD students. And they were looking for kind of senior students And we met once every 2 weeks, and every week 2 people would share their work, and then we'd come into a room and they'd have to be silent and we'd all talk about their work. And so it was that type of a thing. And that was advertised through the Writing Center. You can always contact them. You know, here are my skills. I'm looking to kind of be involved. What do you have? The other thing I'd say, just kind of the point, and this probably goes to Tina's point as well about being ESL and you saying you're a first generation student. I think there are almost some advantages to that, or not advantages, but it gives you a unique perspective and experience. And it's a very tangible example of a skill set. You know, familiarity with academia in 2 different academic systems and different languages. As a first generation student, the pressures of balancing work and financial thing, you know, I think that's something you can absolutely put in a cover letter or say without it being inappropriate, because I do think it speaks to a skill set.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Danielle.
Sorry, no, I just want to thank you. I've never thought of it that way, but yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I was just going to quickly say, my experience with the Writing Center, there was just like a standard posting, and I submitted a resume and a cover letter. I will say I knew at the time an upper year student who I knew worked there, and I let him know that I was going to be applying. I would be surprised. I mean, I don't know what they're doing now in the virtual environment. I would suspect that somewhere there is someone within the English department who is currently involved in the Writing Center, and it might be worth trying to track down that person and either letting them know when you send in an application. It can be light touch, but I think sometimes even things like that can help to kind of move an application along.
Okay, thank you so much. That was really helpful. Thank you both.
Before our conversation drifts too far, we did receive a follow-up question for Jana's point about accreditation. And so this is coming from someone saying, I've been looking a lot into things like Scrum and Agile training to prove my project management skills. But their question here is, do these things actually mean anything if you're applying for stuff related to project management, or would it be enough to tie your doctoral work into project management in a less formally certified way?
I can start in on that. I think it's going to depend a lot on the job. There are certain processes, right, that like Agile or Scrum, that a company or an employer might use. If they want someone who is already fluent with those processes, then yes, there's going to be an advantage to someone who has that. Now, does that mean that they wouldn't be willing to train someone on those? Not necessarily. So I think that the question would be like, what type of space do you see yourself doing project management work in? If you can find some job postings, are they using that type of language? Are they talking about certifications? Can you find someone who's working as a project manager and kind of ask them? My sense is that for sure, kind of like speaking the language, like there will be an advantage to having fluency with a particular skill set, but it's not always required. And I would just sort of start that conversation and start doing some research to see what people are looking for.
Thank you. Fiona, as well, I think you mentioned that you had some information to share about jobs when we had a moment. This might be our time.
Thank you. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for inviting me to this session. Hi, Danielle. It's nice to see you. That was really great. I just wanted to, I'll put the link for this in the chat, but I just wanted to let you know, if you don't already know about it, that GPS now has a doctoral internship program, which will pay you to do an internship. The catch is that they want you to do it after you submit your thesis. So in the period between submitting and having your defense. Because I think they don't want it to take away too much from the work that you're doing on the thesis. But that could potentially be an interesting opportunity for some people. So I'll give you the link in case anyone wants to check it out.
Thank you, Fiona. Other questions for either Matthew or Danielle? We still have time for 1 or 2 more questions if people have anything. Yeah, please, Gabrielle.
Hey, sorry, if no one else is going to ask a question, I'll just get right in there. Were you both very intentional about finding work at universities, or were you open to other sectors? I'm just curious about, you know, when you were looking for jobs, did you just sort of target universities, or could you maybe speak to why you chose to stay in higher education, and just why universities? Because I mean, I know we could apply to so many different sectors, but I think, you know, given our skills, given the PhD, given, you know, we spoke about identity and you identify with your PhD, it makes sense to stay in a university environment. So I'm just wondering if you both could speak to that more.
I can go first. No, I applied very widely. I applied private sector, I applied to management consulting, I applied to a search firm that specialized in kind of recruiting academic executive leadership. I applied to government. I applied to some positions sort of through social sciences and humanities research council, knowing I already had fluency there. I was very open about where, you know, an opportunity might have taken me. In retrospect, I mean, I do think that sometimes having roots in higher education means that your experience is a bit more legible and maybe your experience is a bit more valued. So it's not entirely surprising to me that it played out that I stayed in higher education. And I do think, you know, I'm really happy with that. There's some amazing things to be gained from being in higher education. For myself personally, like, I wouldn't say that was ever a deal breaker. And, you know, who knows, as things change, I wouldn't say that that's the only sector I could ever see myself in. But I think it's really important to speak to that in terms of like understanding yourself, understanding your values, and understanding where you're going to be happy, right? And I think, you know, there's different ways in which we job search, and this might also be a good opportunity for me to just suggest, like, sometimes it's short-term, medium-term, long-term. Of course, there will be situations where we might really need that immediate employment for financial reasons, for security reasons, but that can also be an interim period, an opportunity to kind of get your feet under you and then think about what those next steps are. And the first job that someone might get coming out of a PhD or transitioning out of grad school does not have to be the only type of work they will ever do or the last job that they'll have. So I think knowing where you want to be is great, and sometimes some flexibility will help you to get there.
Yeah, I wasn't, I guess, exclusively wedded to the idea of working in a university. But I think in the process of looking for jobs and reading job descriptions, I realized, well, that is kind of what I want. And that's where I got kind of the most interest and nibbles from employers. My criteria, I guess, was I want to be in a job where the PhD counts for something. And that doesn't have to be academia. But I think in academia, there is a certain, I guess, credibility, maybe a few more doors open. I think Danielle mentioned this initially. You know, the PhD wasn't requisite, but it did kind of help. You know, I'm going to be teaching next year a couple of courses just on the side. Well, I'm in the university system and I can do that now because I have the PhD. So I guess I found myself naturally gravitating towards academia, but I wouldn't limit yourself, or I didn't limit myself to that.
Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks. I want to just say this has been really extraordinarily good, and thank you, Danielle and Matt and Hannah, for this. I just wanted to say something that's kind of evident, should be evident, and that is, in Canada, there is a massive research and academic infrastructure that includes all the universities and includes organizations like the Canadian Council of Academies and SSHRC and any number of such organizations. And there's important publicly, socially creative research going on there. In which, I know lots and lots of people with PhDs in these organizations that are helping to change things within the institutions of research and teaching, but also within Canadian society. For example, Chantal has a PhD in early modern studies from Mac, and she's helping to change the PhD at McGill and across Canada. So like, this is real. And I love what Danielle, what you said about there are all these interesting smart people outside the academy. That is absolutely true. And there are many, many of them in the research and academic infrastructure.
And with that, we are hitting 5 o'clock. And I think we can't ask for a better moment to end on, really, than there are PhDs all over, some of us in disguise. And there are just so many opportunities a PhD can open that you can't necessarily imagine when you're stuck in the program. So I think I will sign off by giving everybody the link to read more about what PhDs from McGill are doing and where you can find them. You can find all of this on our website, tracemcgill.com, under narratives. We publish 3 new interviews every week. We are today talking to Matt and Danielle from higher education, but we publish narratives from people in government, who work overseas, who work in academia, who work in for-profit, who started their own companies. There's really an infinite number of possibilities and creative things that you can do with all of your skills you've gained throughout your program. So with that, I will really, really thank our guests and our wonderful host, Hannah. And we can't really clap all that well in Zoom, but we do have the applause function. So if you are familiar with your reaction and would like to show your appreciation for our audience, give them a virtual round of applause. And at this point, we are going to end. I can hang around for another 10 minutes if people have another few questions to ask us or Paul. But we really wish you the best, and we hope that you'll come and join us again for our next events, all of which are available on our website. Thank you, guys.